Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Kalisperas et oleske olus. I'm Geoffrey Meyer-Fernandez, scientific member of the French School at Athens, Greece. It's my pleasure to welcome you at the 9th webinar organized by the research program entitled Écrire l'histoire de la Grèce franque, Writing the History of Frankish Greece, supervised by Gilles Griveaux, Ludivine Voisin, Philippe Trella, and myself. This program is supported by the French School at Athens and the GRIS, the Groupe de Recherche de l'Université d'Histoire of the University of Rouen-Normandie. Its goal is to both facilitate research on the Greek territories ruled by Latins after the Third and the Fourth Crusades, and study the way historians have written and write today the history of those regions. Tonight, we will discuss Anthi Andronikou's book, Italy, Cyprus, and Artistic Exchange in the Medieval Mediterranean, published by the Cambridge University Press in 2022. We are really delighted to have Anthi with us, as well as two other scholars, Justine Andrews and Tassos Papacostas. I will first introduce Anthi Andronikou and her monograph. Then Justine Andrews and Tassos Papacostas will give their comments and questions to Anthi. And finally, we will invite the audience to do the same by using the chat. Let's start by sharing my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Oh, perfect. So, Anthi Andronikou is lecturer in History of Art and at the School of Culture and Creative Arts of the University of Glasgow. She received several scholarships and awards from various institutions, the Princeton University, the British School at Rome, the Burton Oaks, the Christian Archaeological Society, and the British Academy. Anthi's research interests include Italian art, 13th to 16th century, Byzantine and post-Byzantine art, Crusader art and material culture in the Holy Land, Bolognese manuscripts, transcultural approaches to Christian and Islamic visual cultures, and cultural theory. She also investigates early modern and late medieval Venetian art and its reverberations in the visual language of Lusignan and Venetian Cyprus. Anthi Andronikou's research has appeared, among others, in the Art Bulletin, Artibus and Historiae, the Journal of Medieval History, and Francocratia. In 2019, she has co-edited with Peter Humphrey the Pitas collection, Mythological Paintings and Sculptures. Her monograph that we are discussing tonight, Italy, Cyprus, and Artistic Exchange in the Medieval Mediterranean, is the revised version of a PhD thesis supervised by Brendan Cassidy and defended in 2015 at the University of St. Andrews. For that volume, Anthi won the International 2023 Maria Theochari Award of the Christian Archaeological Society. As soon as it was published, Anthi's book aroused the interest of the scientific society. Several reviews appeared in international scientific journals. Let us mention the reviews published last year by Peter Edbury in the 22nd volume of Crusades and by Nicholas Morton in the 35th volume of Al-Masak. In the same year, Michele Bacci introduced Anthi's book during the second online Edinburgh Byzantine Book Festival. So Anthi Andronikou's book explores the social, cultural, religious, and trade encounters between Italy and Cyprus during the late Middle Ages, from around 1200, 1400, and situates them within several Mediterranean contexts. Revealing the complex artistic exchange between the two regions for the first time, the volume probes the rich but neglected cultural interaction through comparison of several case studies situated in southern Italy, Cyprus, Lebanon, and Syria. The author also investigates 14th-century cross-currents that have not been adequately studied, notably the cult of Saint Thomas Aquinas in Cyprus, Crusader propaganda in Santa Maria Novella in Florence, and a unique series of icons crafted by Venetian trade painters working in Cyprus. Offering new insights into Italian and Byzantine visual cultures, this book contributes to a broader understanding of cultural production and worldviews of the medieval Mediterranean. Let's have a look to the contents of Anthi's book. The volume is divided into 6 chapters, well structured and cohesive, and enriched by 3 appendices. After a thought-provoking introduction that proposed a critical review of artistic relations between Italy and Cyprus during the 13th and the 14th century, the author offers a survey of the Italian presence on the island in the period under review, by using both written and material sources. Anthi turns first to considering the common artistic milieu that existed in Cyprus, the Holy Land, and Apulia. Then she takes a series of intriguing case studies which reflect the complex cross-cultural exchange between the island, ruled by the Lusitanian kings, and Italy. Chapter 3 studies 2 painted panels depicting the Virgin Odigitria located in Apulia, the Madonna della Madia in Monopoli, and the Madonna di Andria. Previously, those panels have not received due scholarly attention and were studied as isolated artifacts. Anthi examines the panels systematically for the first time, taking into account not only art stylistic and iconographic elements, but also issues of iconology and hierotopy, a neologism first employed by Alexei Lidov to suggest a holy image acting as both bearer and creator of a sacred space. If the function of the icon is briefly discussed, since they are not preserved in situ, the author places them within their religious and social contexts and links them to the cultural practices in the era. Most importantly, Anthi rejects the prevalent view that both panels come from Cyprus. On the contrary, she argues that the Madonna della Madia is an Italian product, while the Madonna di Andria is of Constantinopolitan origin or indirectly related to the famous monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai. Anthi suggests the panels belong to a common fund of ideas and foregrounds the crucial role of Mount Sinai exercised in these links. This chapter also raises issues of Crusader art in the Mediterranean, especially considering the provenance of icons. And this is a common issue for all objects, such as manuscripts. Chapter 3 is enriched by Appendix 2, which explores the cult of the Virgin Odigitria in southern Italy. Chapter 4 then turns to a very different topic, It deals with issues of patronage, the cult of Saint Thomas Aquinas in Cyprus, and its links with Italy, the Vita panels in Cyprus, and their Italian counterparts, as well as some deliberations over the vanished decoration previously ignored by academic literature of the Latin Cathedral of the Holy Wisdom, or St. Sophia, in Nicosia, the single most important church building of the Lusinian Kingdom, the site of royal coronations, and the seat of the Latin Archbishop. Anthi Andronikou focuses on a lost moral cycle and an altarpiece displaying the deeds of Saint Thomas Aquinas, both of which was adorned the homonymous chapel in the Cypriot Cathedral. These paintings were part of the patronage of the Italian Archbishop of Nicosia, Giovanni Conti, active in Cyprus from 1319 until his death in 1332. The author offers an attempt to reconstruct both the St. Thomas Aquinas frescoes and altarpiece by taking into account medieval descriptions, but also cultic and artistic developments in both Cyprus and Italy. The great interest of this fine analysis and reconstruction lies in the fact that the lost moral cycle of Thomas Aquinas' life constitutes the earliest known example of the saint's vita anywhere. It also challenges the old cliché considering Cyprus as an important peripheral artistic center of Byzantine and Western art. Chapter 5 explores the famous peregrinations of Peter I of Lusignan, the legendary king of Cyprus, who visited Western Europe and especially Italy between 1362 and 1368 to obtain assistance for his crusade expeditions against the Mamluks of Egypt. The Cypriot ruler was touted by Western literature, but Anthi argues that he also appears in the contemporary material culture. She discovered a yet unidentified portrait of Peter I and two of his Crusader propagandists, painted most possibly by Andrea di Bonaiuti in the so-called Spanish chapel in Santa Maria Novella, the Dominican chapter house in Florence. By investigating Peter's legendary figure through the lens of art history, this chapter both situates the Cypriot king within Western visual culture and provides fascinating information on the intersection of Crusader politics and art in the West. The final chapter is devoted to the 9 surviving panels of a dodecaorton kept in the Church of the Holy Cross in Pelendri, a village located in the Troodos Mountains, northwest of Limassol. Largely overlooked by scholarship, this unique series of painting was particularly deserving of a proper study. Anthi Andronikou has masterfully filled this historiographical gap by closely assessing their critical reception, their iconography, their style, and technique. By considering parallel developments in Italy, Cyprus, and the Byzantine world, she dates them conclusively to the 14th century and attributes them to a Venetian trade painter. Based on archival sources, Anthi Andronikou argues the Greek Cypriot aristocratic family of Podokataro may have been behind the commission of the panels. This family, well known by historians specialized in Lusignan and Venetian Cyprus, maintained connections with northern Italian cities, particularly with Padua and Venice. The last chapter of Anthi's book challenges the tendency of attributing every high-quality artifact to the initiative of the Lusignans. It also shows that Italian painted models were present and appreciated by the Cypriot elites long before the disappearance of the Lusignan ruling family and the takeover of the island by the Venetians in 1473. To sum up, the monograph of Anthi Andronikou is far from a study of Italian influence or borrowings on works of art of Cypriot provenance or supposed Cypriot provenance. On the contrary, it offers to the scholarship a fresh and thought-provoking approach to the discussion of artistic production of Lusignan Cyprus, and more broadly, of the multicultural and multi-confessional world of the Mediterranean at the end of the Middle Ages. By dealing with issues of cross-cultural exchange and the diaspora of people, it refutes the old cliché and highlights a shared tradition between Italy, Cyprus, and the Holy Land. In this way, Anthi Andronikou's research and results are in line with pioneering works of art historians as Valentino Pace and Anne-Marie Welcar. A special mention should be made to the rich numbers of illustrations included in Anthi's book. These are 5 maps and 137 photos or drawings, most in color, and several of which were taken or made by the author. Bibliographical references are prolific. They cover 45 pages and up to date, addressing the multitude of aspects tagged by the author in this ambitious work. A very detailed index, including names, places, but also iconographic themes and technical elements, can be found at the end of the book. The writing style is engaging and makes the volume very easy to read, especially for readers whose first language is not English. So congratulations, Anthi, and thank you so much for offering to the scientific community such a scholarly and refreshing volume. Before giving the floor to Justine, I would like to ask you, how did you approach the process of transforming your dissertation into a book? A minute. No, I cannot hear you. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Geoffrey, thank you so much for this kind and generous introduction, and thank you for this kind invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with all of you today. Now, regarding your question, when I decided to publish my thesis as a book, I did some minor revisions. However, I decided that I needed to add an extra chapter to strengthen my case. So I added chapter 5, which is the chapter that examines Peter Lusignan and his voyages in Italy. So I wrote an extra chapter. And also, while revising my manuscript, I paid particular attention to the opening paragraphs of chapters. in order to signpost my readers. So I used a lot of signposting to link the chapters between them and make a narrative. So that was my approach of transforming a thesis to a book. Of course, apparently I had to change some terminology as well, which is, I think it's obvious when you revise a manuscript from a thesis to a book, you need to change some terms like dissertation or thesis and so on. Yeah.
I see. And do you have any advice for those who want to publish their dissertation? Because as everybody know, the publication of the PhD thesis is a real challenge for young scholars, and especially nowadays.
It is, it's true, but what I did and my advice to younger scholars would be to look at the bibliography in their thesis and identify potential publishers, because since a publisher publishes topics on their field, then they may be interested in publishing their manuscript. So I would advise them to look at the bibliography, identify publishers, and then get in touch with them based on their preferences. And of course, do the basics, read their thesis as objectively as possible to determine what they need to add or take out or revise. And that's the first step, I would say, and then get in touch with the publisher, with an appropriate publisher. Yeah.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Justine. Justine Andrews is Associate Professor in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of New Mexico. Her research interests include cross-cultural interaction in the medieval Mediterranean, the artistic legacy of the Crusades in the Eastern Mediterranean, and illuminated manuscripts from Byzantium. Justine has published on the art and architecture of medieval Cyprus, as well on illuminated books of Job. So Justine, the floor is yours. And I will unmute your microphone. Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Geoffrey, and Anthi for this wonderful book. I'm honored to be included in the group here today to talk about this this really rich and extraordinary text. So it's my job to ask a few questions, I guess, of Anthi. And so, Anthi, you've produced a study that is rich with examples and details, both stylistic and historical. And you've kind of pulled at the many threads that connect Cyprus and Italy. Oftentimes in the text, it seems that you upend previous scholarship's centering of Cyprus, kind of as the hub or even the progenitor for artistic exchange in the medieval Mediterranean. Can you help us by situating Cyprus in the broader discussion of medieval Mediterranean? There's a great deal of discussion, particularly within historical circles, but also a little bit in art history about the medieval Mediterranean as an entity. So things that I'm thinking about are, is Cyprus's islandedness important for understanding its place in this complex web of exchange? And if possible, maybe using your example, like Apulia, how is that different or distinct or not from coastal regions? Is there anything there that we need to kind of be aware of? Or how would you think about maybe Cyprus in that broader medieval Mediterranean context? To unmute again. Oh, you're muted still. Wait a minute. I think Geoffrey has to.
Okay, thank you, Justine, for the question, which is really intriguing and um, and reflects the complex situation, cultural and beyond situation in the medieval Mediterranean. But it's my tenet, let's say, at the risk of stating the obvious, is that no culture is an island. So all cultures are interconnected. So no culture is isolated from each other, as is the case of medieval Cyprus, of course, which I think it played an important role in the context of cultural exchange because of its geographical position, which was very close to the Holy Land. And especially after the late 13th century, it became basically the place where refugees from the Holy Land would go. And that's why it was a center that basically acted as transmitting visual culture, not only further west, although scholarship, I think, overstates its important role. Like, for example, in southern Italy, that Cyprus was the leader in this relation. On the other hand, I think nowadays we should look for terms like transculturation that also give emphasis not only on the culture that we avoid using terms like influence or borrowings, but using more interactive terms like transculturation, as I said, which shows the giving and reception of cultures at an equal stance, I would say. Now, in terms of the term islandedness, to be honest, I'm not familiar with the term, but I imagine that it refers to cultures of islands that were not isolated places, but they reach out to connect with other cultures. And the Mediterranean is a sea that enables that. So if we see geography, for example, the fact that Mediterranean is that we have islands scattered in the Mediterranean, this is something that enables the transmission of visual culture, connectivity. It enables mercantile, the trade, diplomacy, and even war. So that would be, I don't know if that answered the questions, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, I thank you for that answer. I guess what I was thinking about in terms of islandness is a couple of things. So recently I heard Luca Zavagno talk a little bit about this in the early Middle Ages and thinking about the many islands within the Mediterranean. And he used an intriguing quote from Carlo Ginzburg, which is called "No Island is an Island." And I think you expressed that exactly right. Like that idea that, you know, when we say insular or island, it can mean, like the word in English, insular, can mean island, but it can also mean isolated. But that's not what we're thinking about for the Mediterranean, is what you're saying. Like it's really about the interconnectivity.
Yes, it's let's say a connecting sea.
Right, exactly. The concept of the connecting sea. Yeah.
And in terms of topography, of geography, it's not an ocean. So circulation was easier. It was a friendlier sea, let's say, that encouraged this kind of communication and contact between different cultures that inhabited the areas in the Mediterranean. The way I see it, perhaps I'm wrong. Yeah.
No, I think if I can just kind of follow up on my own question. So the question of Apulia then, is there anything that you see different in a coastal community or in a community that has a connection to a mainland? Or do you think that they function in the same way, are they the same kind of hub or center within that Mediterranean exchange?
Being a person that I'm from I'm from an island myself. I think that people inhabiting islands are looking outward, are outward looking. So they seek communication, they seek contact with the outer world. So they cannot be confined within the limits of an island. And this is something we can see in the visual culture of Cyprus as well. I don't know what Tassos thinks. Yes, what do you think, Geoffrey or the audience? Yeah.
Maybe we can
Yes.
keep this
Come back.
yes,
Yes.
after at the end of the webinar, but just keep in mind this interesting
Yes.
comments. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll
Yeah.
go ahead and throw out my second question then. So thinking about this idea of decentering Cyprus, maybe one of the examples you talk about kind of removing from that direct exchange with Cyprus, if I have this correctly, is the panel of the Madonna della Madia, right? From Manopolis and Italy. And so you're setting these two icons that you're talking about in a kind of parallelism, I guess, rather than direct contact. And I'm wondering how that intersects with what you also mentioned in your preface about the challenge of knowing how medieval viewers might have comprehended these distinctive artistic styles. For example, I think you make the comment that, certainly art historians have this huge amount kind of archive in our brains that we bring to these things, and we immediately begin to kind of think about the distinctions and the similarities. So in what ways does that question of reception or perception play a role in our understanding of these kinds of works that are produced within a complex environment like the medieval Mediterranean? How does reception work for that?
Yes, that's yes, a fascinating question. And now this systematic distinguishing of formal stylistic features is something that was basically began as early as the 16th century with Vasari, and then it took its apogee in the 19th century when art history was established as a discipline. However, I believe that people in the Middle Ages could perceive style, but however, based on their personal experience and agendas. So, for example, in my opinion, an artist, an Italian, a Florentine artist would be able to distinguish Florentine art from Sienese based on their craft. And we have the example, for example, of Cennino Cennini, of this Florentine painter who would be able to distinguish the illusionism introduced by Giotto. However, for example, if a bishop or a theologian enter a church, they may not be able to recognize Sienese painting or Florentine, but they would be able to read a doctrine or religious message behind a fresco. Then, for example, it depends on the audience and their agency. So if we had a merchant who sponsored, for example, the frescoes of a church, that merchant may be able to read a political message behind frescoes, for example, or an average illiterate believer might be able to use to see the practical usage of an image, for example, to pray in front of them, to venerate it, and so on. So it depends on the experience of the audience. But in any case, I don't think that this distinguishing was self-conscious, especially referring to stylistic, to being able to determine stylistic differences or iconographic ones. I don't know if that makes sense. If that answers the question, Justine. Now, in terms of so people didn't have our training. They didn't have, they were not sitting at their desk doing their research and then being able to go, oh, this is Sienese, this is Florentine, this is Islamic, this is so on and so forth. And the same goes for artistic exchange in the Mediterranean, the way I see it. So, for example, perhaps a Christian in Cyprus might have been able to appreciate the aesthetic appeal of an Islamic object, but they wouldn't be able to read its meaning when that object was in an Islamic framework. So they would have an aesthetic appreciation of it, but not being able to penetrate its meaning when in an Islamic context. And that's the way I think that cultural exchange work is. It's a giving and receiving, and then something is being lost in the process. And this is the original meaning, which it becomes different in the receiving culture. I don't know if that.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's your? Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying that the reception is really predicated by the context. So the context really. But the other thing I was thinking about is that within these layers or levels or distinguishing aspects of reception, there's also I think the specialness of places within the Mediterranean is that an individual could actually have those multiple readings as well, right? Like, so the merchant could also be religious participant, could also be maybe connected to the politics in some way. So there could be all of these different layers of that. I think that's really intriguing, and how reception within the Mediterranean functions in that multiplex way, just like these other things that you pointed out, the exchange itself and the different styles and iconographies as well. They're all very in flux.
Yes.
Which I love. Yeah. And my last question then is a little more basic, I think, but it seems that it's a question that kind of, anyway, it always seems to pop up. So thinking about that, how exchange you beautifully laid out, depends on these many, many factors. And I especially love that you always kind of bring it back to the documentary or the chronological or the historical context. So there's the what we see and the styles and the iconographies, but also the broader context. So you make that very clear in your text. But if we talk about reproduction or copying as an integral part, oftentimes in the discussion of Byzantine art, what's the role of copying, again, in this broader, more complex, multifarious late Middle Age in the Mediterranean? So how do copies work? And is that even a term that you find valuable, or what should we say, maybe what the response is to someone coming at this material and saying, well, they're copies. They're copies of these images of the Virgin. They're copies of different styles and things. What does that mean?
Well, since we're talking about the Virgin Mary, and it's the type of the Virgin of the Andria, they are copies, but they have a new life. So the artist did not simply copy an icon because they found it aesthetically pleasing, but they copied a holy image, and through that way, the holiness was replicated and transmitted to the faithful in Italy, for example. So artists would copy not only the iconography, but the rituals and the wondrous qualities. And that's why we see, for example, all these images like the Madonna della Madia or the Madonna della Fonteintrani and so many other Madonnas having a new life in Italy. So they have their own story, they have their own miraculous narratives, they are carried out in processions, they are miracle performers. So they are bearers of sacredness in their new spaces. So they have a new life. They are not simply copies. So their holiness is, let's say, it's extended, it's replicated, and it's what as Geoffrey said before, and the term I borrow from Alexei Lidov, they are bearers of hierotopy, so they create the sacred space. So this is the case with icons, but then when we examine other objects, let's say objects of everyday life, objects, not holy objects, then again, there is something lost in this process of cultural transference. So this is the way the mechanisms of cultural exchange work. So you have an initial meaning in the context, in the original context, but then in the process of this transference, the meaning is recast, is revised, is reinterpreted, and then when transferred to the receiving culture, it acquires a new meaning. It's something else. So this is at the core of exchange and creation of culture, I think. And this is the example of, for example, of Islamic script, Arabic script that we see it in churches. So they have a different meaning in churches, but in a mosque or in an Islamic context. But then in the process, their form is changed and their meaning as well. When in a Christian context, I don't know if that makes sense, but yes.
Yeah, that's a nice example. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your wonderful responses. And I'm gonna stop now and come back maybe later, but I think we'll move on to Tassos.
Oh, thank you so much, Justine. Thank you so much for your great review. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Justine and Anthi. So I will now give the floor to Tassos. Tassos Papacostas is a senior lecturer in Byzantine material culture in the Department of Classics at King's College, London. His research and publications engage with the material culture and architecture of Byzantium, as well as aspects of art, archaeology, and the monuments of Cyprus from late antiquity to the early modern period. Tassos deals also with the manifestations of Venetian and Renaissance culture in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Tassos, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Geoffrey. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Congratulations, Anthi, on the book. Very exciting. Everybody should get it. So let me start. Yes, that issue of insularity, because before I get to my questions, actually, the issue of insularity, the way I perceive it, I mean, there's a practical aspect to it. You know, islands are by definition sort of self-contained entities, which in the case of Cyprus in particular, makes it much easier to study compared to other areas. You know, everywhere else you would wonder, where do I stop? Where are my geographical limits? And in some cases, chronological limits as well. Cyprus has this, of course, it's not on its own in that it has the geographical limits. In some ways, it has chronological limits because of the changes of regime across the sort of post-classical centuries, the centuries that are of interest to us. But I think the fact, you know, if you consider the development of Cypriot archaeology, you know, starting with the Bronze Age archaeology, down to what we are all doing here, sort of medieval art history or architecture history, and then other aspects too. Cyprus is at the, well, not exactly at the forefront, but it fares fairly well, I guess, in comparison to other parts of the Mediterranean world, because of the fact that it is there, sort of self-contained. So I think that's an important aspect. And then on the other issue that I think it was Justine who mentioned this, whether coastal areas, whether we perceive any difference between coastal and more inland areas. And you explained, Anthi, that islands, you know, there's always this urge to look to the outside world. But even within the context of Cyprus, if we think about the supposedly isolated Troodos Mountains and their monuments, their art, I mean, it is mainly through these monuments that we establish, to a large extent, the links with the outside world. These monuments, which are supposed to be in these remote villages, you know, thinking about Mutulas and the frescoes of 1280, that's the monument that gives us a date, a secure date for a work of art. And it's not in Nicosia, it's not in Famagusta, it's in this small church in the mountains. So connectivity is not just between the islands, I guess, and the outside world, but within the islands, between their great centers in the lowlands along the coast and the more remote inland areas. Anyway, that was my rambling about that issue. Let me get on to my questions and my comments. Well, as I think I mentioned before, the chapter I enjoyed most and I found really exciting. I mean, they were all very illuminating and lots of things I had no idea about. But the sixth chapter on the panels from Pelendri, I mean, which Geoffrey showed in an image earlier on to remind our audience, these are the sort of 9 out of 12 surviving dodecaorton icons on the iconostasis, the tall iconostasis in the Church of the Holy Cross at Pelendri, which, as Anthi explains very clearly, apparently came from another church, presumably in the wider area. So they were not made for this particular church. And in terms of dating, again, Anthi has established here, we see them on the iconostasis up there. And Anthi tells me she was there with her ladder trying to get decent photographs of them. So datings proposed in the past ranged from anything between the 14th and the 16th century. So really wide-ranging dates. Anthi has established very convincingly that they are from the middle of the 14th century. But beyond that, what is, I think, even more important is the artistic sort of landscape they belong to. Because, again, as Geoffrey explained, she links them to Venetian artistic production. There are clear links there. I mean, the colors, if you look at the various panels, I mean, you can see on the image here the hair, the color of the hair of the crucified Christ, very unusual in a Byzantine context, but parallels in Italian and Venetian art. So that's very exciting. If there is time later on, I may return to this and ask, in order to discuss patronage issues, in fact, concerning these panels. But let me start with a very general question. Well, you sensibly explain that the term Crusader art is problematic. It has been in use for quite some time now. Lots of scholars have noted that it is not always used appropriately, perhaps. We use it and we each mean something perhaps slightly different, which is indeed very problematic. But then I wonder what other options do we have if what we are talking about is artistic creation in the Eastern Mediterranean during the period of the Crusades, getting quite late into that period. So first question, do you have any alternative suggestions? And second question, I wonder if we could not continue using it, this term Crusader art, but sort of leave behind the assumptions about patrons and artists, which are often made. If it's Crusader art, either the patron or the artist must be crusaders or have some link to the Crusades. Use the term as a merely chronological and geographical sort of descriptor. And this is not without its problems either, I am well aware. So I'd like to invite you to tell us what you think about all this. What's the way forward? Is there a way forward?
Well, yes, Tassos, yes, that's that's the Crusader art. It's a perennial question of whether the term is an appropriate one or not. Well, as I say in the book, I think it's an erratic term, but a necessary one because we don't have an alternative term yet. Crusader art obviously privileges the Western European view over other cultures that were active in the area. For example, we have patrons or painters who were not Westerners, and still their work is being named as a Crusader. So I think we should seek out an alternative term. Now, the term lingua franca has been suggested instead, which refers to a common language used by people who speak different languages, but they need something common, so they communicate with each other. But then if we look at the etymology of lingua franca, it's again problematic because it's the language of the Franks. So I believe that this is not either an opposite term. Well, that's a new generation of scholars. Perhaps they come up with a term. I don't know, perhaps 13th century Mediterranean koine or something like that. But I think it's very difficult to get rid of the, if we use the term Crusader art, it's ideologically charged, so it's difficult to get rid of this ideological background. Although if we try, let's say, to use it without referring to chronology or geography or ideology and so on, but I think that it's, if we even all scholars agree that, okay, we use Crusader art, but it's simply a descriptor, this is still problematic. So yes, all scholars who work on this material, we should try and come up with a new term which is more inclusive, let's say.
Okay, yeah, maybe we should call it the thing we all mean by Crusader art or something.
Or just Crusader art in inverted commas, I don't know.
Indeed. Okay, yeah, it is indeed a difficult question. No easy, no easy answers. And indeed, I mean, other periods, as far as I'm aware, other terms used for other periods which are equally problematic, they haven't found. There's no solution either to things like post-Byzantine or meta this or post that. I mean, the moment you
Yes, because scholars need some common coordinates to write about, so we need some terms that we communicate with each other. That's why I still use the term in the book, although yes, in
okay,
explaining why I adopt this.
Okay, so this brings me to Apulia and Crusader painting in Apulia. So you explain that part of the deal here, what we see happening in Apulia and how it relates to the Levant, to the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Mediterranean further east, is related to pilgrimage and commercial routes going eastwards. But you also explain very clearly in terms of the relationship between Cyprus and Apulia, as you said already, as a response to other questions, that the relations between Cyprus and Apulia, and I think I'm quoting here what you're saying, must be indirect and incidental, considering that Apulia's links with the Holy Land were much more important than any direct links with Cyprus, which makes perfect sense. But in this overall scheme of, this overall sort of landscape of pilgrimage and commercial routes that seem to have defined, to a certain extent, art in Apulia, first, why, I mean, should we consider something similar for Cyprus? Why shouldn't we consider this for Cyprus as well? That, for example, you mentioned that there were occasionally in Apulia passing pilgrims who commissioned works there. I mean, as far as I'm aware, we don't have any clear evidence of that happening in Cyprus, but could it be an option? So that's part of my question. The other part is why, Apulia is not the only place that had direct links with the Holy Land, and in the geographical space between South Italy and the Holy Land, there are all these other places. The Ionian Islands, the Peloponnese, Crete, more Aegean islands. Why don't we see something similar there? Is it just a question of accidents or survival? Things haven't survived as well? Or is the setup different? Because, I don't know, because Crete is under Venetian control, Peloponnese is under the Villardouin or the Byzantines at different times. So what is the explanation for that?
Yes, perhaps it's that it's a matter of that material hasn't survived until today. That could be one explanation. And the other that was indeed southern Italy and Apulia, they had close contacts with the Holy Land. So Crusaders who would embark from there, and even Frederick II would begin his Crusader enterprise from Brindisi. So it was really an important Crusader, let's say, place where people and pilgrims and warriors would stop in Apulia. But one thing I would say perhaps is that because in southern Italy the majority of the population was Roman Catholic, of course the Salento area and some other areas people were Orthodox. But perhaps the fact that we have Roman Catholics in southern Italy, as opposed, for example, to the Peloponnese or Crete or Cyprus, where the majority of population was Greek Orthodox, perhaps the population there might have been more hesitant in embracing the Crusades, as opposed to southern Italy, where the population was Latin Latin Catholic. So perhaps that could be an explanation. That's why perhaps we see more enthusiastic manifestations of Crusader art related in southern Italy as opposed to Greek lands under the Latins. No, perhaps.
Yeah, and indeed, and the other thing you explained very well actually in that particular chapter on Apulia is how both the difference in audience, as you just explained, Roman Catholic as opposed to Greek, but also that also has an impact on what is painted. Actually, you mentioned that we've got on the one hand we have individual saints in Apulia in lots of cases, whereas further east we get the sanctuary cycles, which I understand do not occur that frequently.
No, it's only, yes, it's usually and mainly in Greek, in a Greek context, Greek churches, that people were Greek Orthodox. Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. Right, another question, again, fairly general, which is more Cyprus focused this time. And this is something that I've been it's been in a way not bothering me, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. The study, and it's related to what I mentioned before, the practicalities of studying Cyprus as a space. The study of Cyprus, including its Byzantine and later medieval heritage, started fairly early in comparison to other places. So we see a sort of precocious rise of Cypriot studies with the publication of monuments, of painted panels, all sorts of investigations, starting, with in terms of the panels and of the paintings, with Sotiriou in the 1930s publishing the album, making known with black and white photographs of the time all this material, and with Talbot Rice publishing the panels. And then from that point onwards, you get more and more. Whereas for Lebanon, for example, we had to wait until much, much more recently to get studies of the material there in order to compare it. So I wonder if this fact, the precocious rise of Cypriot studies, or the study of Cypriot material, has had, I wouldn't call it a detrimental impact, but has affected the way everything else has been seen. I mean, as you explained, Cyprus hasn't much to do with Apulia. And what was said in the past about Apulia linking material there with Cyprus, I think is largely based on the fact that the material from Cyprus was known. And also the fact that there is much less from Constantinople. Had Constantinople preserved lots of monuments and panels and manuscripts, illuminated manuscripts, from the same centuries, we would have thought, okay, we would have talked about Constantinople or places in the Holy Land. I mean, at Acre, we know about manuscripts, and not much else. And of course, architecture, but I'm leaving architecture outside of the discussion for now. So there is an imbalance in the coverage of the material in historiography, which I think affected developments. So would you agree with this, or do you still think there is something special about Cyprus that
No,
draws so
I,
much
I,
attention?
I absolutely agree with this, that sometimes the way scholarship is being shaped depends on the material that has been published. So that's why we see Cyprus being discussed early enough in scholarship in relation to cultural exchange, for example, with southern Italy already from the 1980s. While material from Syria or Lebanon that was not published until the late 1990s or the 2000, it was not included in scholarship until very recently. And so this is the way scholarship works, and so this is the way that scholars, pave the way forward, let's say. So now that we have several publications from different, let's say, areas, we are able to produce scholarship that is more inclusive, let's say, in this cross-cultural approach to let's say, in southern Italy, Cyprus, and Eastern Christianity in the Middle East. So I absolutely agree with you.
Okay, and you're, I guess, well, you're making a major step there in your Apulian chapter by sort of not dissociating, but clarifying how the relationship actually works or doesn't in some cases. So I guess we will all be grateful to you for that, for clarifying these issues. Something that's related to this, which has to do with actually the randomness of the surviving material.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking,
Yes.
all the panels at Sinai, which have been discussed quite a lot, their provenance, who, why, when, and you talk about some of them. And I was thinking about the panels on Cyprus, the famous panels of St. Nicholas and the Virgin of the Carmelites, which again you discussed. I think from what I see, everybody in the audience knows these panels, so I don't need to explain what they are. Very large panels, late 13th century. But the St. Nicholas panel is the one that sort of anchors its creation to Cyprus, because St. Nicholas is labeled off the roof, St. Nicholas of the roof, Agis Nikolaos Stegis, which is the name of a specific monastery. Now I'm imagining, if it didn't have this Stegis there, what on earth would we have assumed about that panel, and where would we have attributed it to what sort of artists, milieu, location, and all that?
That's why we are grateful the inscription is there and actually survives.
And it seems to be original.
Yes.
I mean, there have been
Yes.
suggestions that it may not be original, but I think it
Mm-hmm.
is. Okay, I think, Geoffrey, how are we doing with time? Is there, I mean, I've got smaller questions, more specific questions, and Justine does presumably as well, but
You have time, Tasso, if you want to continue. Yes.
okay, so let me come back to, yes, small questions. The lost Aquinas frescoes in St. Sophia that you sort of reconstruct so masterfully, proposing a convincing reconstruction of them. Is there an indication that they may still be there under the plaster, under the whitewash? I mean, I think you do mention this somewhere, but do you know anything about works done during the British colonial period? Was anything seen, revealed, or?
I haven't come across something related to this when searching for the cycle there. Well, that would be really a miracle if like something really, really important. If it happened, if the whitewash was removed and we had the frescoes beneath it, that would be something wonderful. Well, that's wishful thinking. I don't know. But we still have some traces from other parts of the decoration in Hagia Sophia, like the crosses and some zigzag patterns. So I don't know. I don't really know. I wish we had.
It would be wonderful if
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, there are works taking place now in the building, but I don't know whether it's only the outside or if something has been done on the inside as well. I haven't been for a while.
Well, I'm not aware of these works because yes, I haven't been there for quite some time, but if they discover something, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. My last question, and then I'll
Mhm.
let direct us further. The Florence, Santa Maria Novella, and Peter the First.
Mhm.
You explain how this works, his journey to Italy, and how he can be identified in two different places within the frescoes in the Spanish chapel. I still wonder what would the purpose of this be? I mean, who would, again, think about audience, who would recognize him apart from the strictly contemporaries who might have seen the king, might have participated in the events, and then a few years later, when the frescoes are executed, there is a sort of a record, in a way, of the presence of that foreign ruler, that foreign delegation in the frescoes. But otherwise, what does it mean? What would the purpose mean for the audience?
The audience was a sophisticated one. It was a Dominican order, so it was the order that was the educated. That it was the order that would place emphasis on education, so they would be able to identify some protagonists in the fresco, especially those who lived the events, so who witnessed the visit of Peter Lusignan in Santa Maria Novella. And it was in Trecento, in Italian painting of the Trecento, it was a common, it was something common to introduce contemporary people into the biblical narrative. So it was not something strange. It was not something out of nowhere. So they would depict people of the time. And apart from that, of course, in the one portrait of Peter, we have the shield with Jerusalem cross. So that could be a sign that would basically call audience following the events to recognize it, to read. So the most people would be able to identify that this is a cross of Jerusalem and that behind this person could be the king of Jerusalem, a person who is related to the kingdom of Jerusalem.
Okay, but the primary audience then is first and most the Dominicans, and then whoever else has access.
And then visitors and whoever has access, but the primary audience were the Dominicans there, so they would get, it was their chapter house, so yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think Geoffrey, back to you.
Thank you very much, Tasso and Anthi. I will now invite the audience to give their comments and questions to Anthi by using the chat. And in the meantime, I would like to ask questions to Anthi and Tassos and Justine also. So we were discussing about the problematic term of Crusader art. What about influence? Because it's a very problematic notion in art history. Do we have an alternative to this term? What do you think about it?
Yes, there are several terms that one could use to describe a more interactive contact and artistic dialogue between cultures, such as, for example, appropriation, which is a bit still, I don't know if it's in usage anymore, appropriation, because it shows a more active agency on the part of the receiver. Then we have terms like biculturation, which is a balanced and mutual exchange between two cultures. Then the term transculturation, interculturalism, and hybridity, and so on. So definitely we can use other terms rather than influence. Yes.
And I think that it also depends on each case, right? I
Yes,
mean,
exactly. On the
when you have a clear transfer from A to B and nothing goes the opposite way, as opposed to
a mutual
whole
exchange.
range in between, a whole spectrum of different types, different levels of exchange, I guess we have to be, well, to consider the circumstances and the terminology we use for each specific.
Yes, exactly.
And at least the English language, mercifully, is very rich. To explain all these terms.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that each of the terms has both, like all of these different terms, because I've been grappling with this for a long time too. I mean, they are contextually specific to different periods of our own field, right? As you said, like there's, influence, but also hybridity has its own packaging, certainly through Homi Bhabha. And then, and then there's the context like Tassos is explaining, like each term fits maybe a different context. So I think it's fascinating to think about that. I mean, I've used terms from like fusion and flexibility and permeableness and, anything to try to get at that active and multi-way exchange rather than a one-to-one or something that's passive or static. I guess those are the things that are important to me, is like expressing, for the most part, the kind of fluidness and movement and activity, and trying to get away from static or singular. Whatever that word is, that encompasses all of that.
Well, and also
exactly. I think, yeah. No, Tassos, go ahead.
Take into account the element of, how much of this is random, actually. We tend to think about intentionality and purpose behind everything. The patron decides this for that purpose. It has to be there. It has to be like this. Yes, in many cases, that's indeed the case. But in lots of other cases, it's really random. Something just happened by accident to travel from A to B and had an impact there through another set of coincidences. So I guess we should remember that.
And can we talk about this if we don't have the A to B? There's a neither nor of those two things, right? There's the specificity and the intentionality, there's the randomness, and then there's what we actually get, which is 90% no contextual like texts or things like that to help us. So how do we still cope with these kinds of objects? I think that's what's so intriguing about this area. And I just want to come back to something you said, Tassos, earlier about, I've thought a lot about the boundedness of Cyprus. And like you had said, that I'm going to say a kind of mistaken initial impression of like, oh, Cyprus has very clear boundaries. I don't have to expand beyond, like I know but Cyprus is such a tricky island that it seems to never end, and there's constant complexity. That's my perspective anyway, is that initially you approach it like, oh, it's bounded and I can, look at it from in this way, but it's absolutely much more complex for me.
Yeah, actually, as Anthi shows in the book, with you get Cyprus in Florence if you consider the depiction of the first something Cypriot there. So
good point.
Yes, and there is a question in the chat.
Andreas Nicolaides asks if the maniera Cypria, the term, is obsolete.
It's a term that has been criticized, right? So it's, let's say, Maniera Cipria is a branch of Crusader art. So it has been criticized, or it has been suggested that it should be limited to a group of works of art that were produced in the Marathasa Valley. I don't know. What do you think? I think, yes, it's a term that it's useful to scholars when studying a common area, a shared field. So it's a term that is useful so that we can communicate, but still, again, it's a problematic term, I would say. I don't know. What do you think, Justine and Tassos and Geoffrey?
I mean, I think one of the issues that I have with that, as you said, Anthi, it kind of seems to have become very specific. So can we like break it apart like you were doing with Crusader art and think of it more broad terms? But the problem for me is that whenever you do the maniera, whether it's maniera greca, I feel like you're isolating it within only those visual terms, only those. And for these spaces, as you've so beautifully shown, there's so much you have to account for. And I feel like when you're taking a maniera as just style, you are depriving yourself of all of these other intersections and other ways in which to look at the connective. So it does become limiting.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that the term of Maniera Cipria was created by Dula Muriqi, who wanted to put also Cyprus at the as a center, an artistic center in the Levant. And there is also the term Maniera Syriaca that we found now in the literature. So yes, it's something problematic, and maybe we have to think about it. And yes, there is another question from Stella Frigeru regarding the style of the objects and their reception. She wrote that I suppose that each viewer could recognize what was familiar with. Later travelers notice generally that in Greek churches, they do not have sculpture, but only flat representations. As of objects ordered in Cyprus, we know the Antependium of Othon de Grandson. Yes. And
Yes.
about the Antependium of Othon de Grandson, what do you think the attribution from Cyprus?
It's not an object that I studied a lot, so I cannot really, I don't have a view on this, and I wouldn't like to say something without knowing it. So yes, I don't know if you've had the chance to study it in depth, but yeah.
I didn't study it in depth this subject, but
I'm not very, yes.
It's the attribution to Cyprus is very seductive, and but yes, I think that it deserves more study, and also for the technique of the textile, I think so. Yes. Andreas Nicolaides, thank you for the answer. And Tassos, you wanted to say something about the pedantry panels and patronage.
Yes, yeah, if we can do that. Yes, if we have time. No, I was wondering. So on the one hand, there is the dating and the artistic context. With 14th century, something Venetian, some Venetian link there. And you link that Anthi with the Podokataro family. Again, for those who may not remember how this works, we have the central nave of the church, the iconostasis, the panels up there, which came from another church, I guess we don't know when exactly they got to the Holy Cross, when they were transferred there, but they are there now, and they have been there for a while. And then there are two aisles, north and south, flanking the central nave, both added subsequently at different times. The northern aisle has frescoes. There are frescoes everywhere, of course. Has the frescoes which include donor portraits, a coat of arms that is a variant of the Lusignan coat of arms. But then on the iconostasis of this northern aisle, there is something that looks very similar to the arms of the Podocataro, which dates, though, to a much later period, so not the 14th century. So you make this link with the Podocataro, and I wonder if, why then, why, even if the donors, assuming the donors are a Podocataro couple rather than John of Antioch, the brother of the king, with his wife, why would we have the royal, the family coat of arms indicating not the king, but another member of the family, in fact, through the variant? I tell you how I see this, because I think the Podocataro link is later. There is a link to Belendri, but as you explain, from the sort of mid-15th century onwards. I don't think this makes much of a difference in your argument and assessment, but what is the deal there? Why should we exclude completely Lusignan?
The fact that the coat of arms there is later doesn't exclude a possible presence of the Podocataro family in Pelendrin before that. And we may don't have a material evidence of this. But I wouldn't exclude this possibility. And even, for example, the presence of the coat of arms there, in the fresco, the one, perhaps is maybe they wanted to honor one of the members of the Lusignan. They did it perhaps to gain their attention, because it was a family that was trying to climb the ranks, to become aristocracy. So I don't know, but that the coat of arms there is an indication that there is a link, even if it's later. And I would suggest a link as well with the Church of Catholic in Pelendri, that both monuments, I think, show this change of allegiances, and the fact that some of Podocataro branches became Catholics at some point. And I think I suggest this in the book, that the so-called Latin chapel in Pelendri was actually a private chapel of the Podocataros, which at some point, if I remember well, because I haven't read it for a while, and yes, that some of the branches of the Podocataros might have become Catholics. But in the book, I suggest that the Latin chapel of Pelendri might have been a private space for the Podocataro family. Yes.
The Latin chapel is the north aisle, the same
Yes,
space.
the north aisle. Yes, the so-called Latin chapel.
But again, reading, what you said about the panels, the panels which are in the nave now, and which were made for another church, I was wondering whether we shouldn't think, John of Antioch, who was traditionally associated with that northern aisle because of the coat of arms. No, he's a brother of the king who was in Italy. He is involved with. I was thinking if there's a Cornaro link, to be honest, with the estates of the Cornaro in Episcopi, their involvement with the king in Venice, and by extension, possibly with his brother, and whether one could explore that link. Cornaro, Venice, links with the Lusignan, and whether all this could come together in Belendri. But again, that's
I don't know, but then it's this it's Ugo Podokátaros wheel, which refers to this chapel of the Holy Cross, which again it's an interesting link here that he wanted to have his mass in this chapel of the Holy Cross, which is intriguing, I think, and that's why I linked it with the Pelendri and in connection with the coats of arms as well. I don't know.
yeah.
It's a suggestion. It's a dialogue in the scholarship on the field.
Oh, I think
in the
you
field.
raised the
Yes,
issues for us
yes,
to
yes,
happen
yes.
further.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that chapel in the past, it has been the chapel of the Holy Cross mentioned in the Testament of Ugo Podokataro from the middle of the 15th century. In the past, it was thought, it was suggested it could be Stavrovouni.
Yes.
But I think it must be Nicosia, actually, because it is mentioned among Nicosia
Mm-hmm.
monasteries and churches. And it's much more likely that he would want. Maybe we are getting too much detail here, not necessary.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, let's leave it. I'll
Yes,
stop
yes.
there.
Yes.
But yes, we have to be careful when we attribute a patronage just with the presence of a coat of arms, I think.
Yeah. But as you say, Geoffrey, here we have the donors, so it's slightly different. It's not just an isolated coat of arms. Yeah.
And also we have a Paleologan style on the painting that is very different than the panels that Anthi discussed. So this is very interesting. The difference of style used by the elite in Italy and Cyprus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And since these panels came from elsewhere, do we know of destroyed churches in the area of Belendri where they could have come from?
Not really. There was a church. Let me see here because we don't really know, but I think there was a church that was. We don't have specific names of churches that were destroyed, but we know that the panels in the 1980s were not in the Holy Cross in Pelendri. They were in a modern church in Pelendri. So we
Okay, so it's
guess
only
from where they yes.
okay. I thought they were there since at least
No,
early in
no.
the 20th century.
No. And we have some reproductions of the 14th century panels by a painter who was inspired by them in the 17th century, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So they were not
After.
worthy since then. Someone paid attention to them and copied them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
If in the 17th century their story was known, or I don't know.
Okay.
Is there any other question from the audience? In the meantime, I would like to ask for Anthi, but it's not about the book, but maybe I can ask you the question. I saw that you are currently working on your second monograph, the medieval art of translation. Can you tell us a bit about this publishing project?
Yes, it's a project that focuses on the 13th century, and it adopts cultural translation theory as the basically the theoretical approach to connections between Islamic and Christian cultures in southern Italy, in Cyprus, and the Holy Land. Yes, it's in progress, and hopefully we'll be able to publish it soon. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Good luck with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a new field, something else.
So, if there is no other question or comments,
Yes, any questions from the audience? Any comments, any remarks?
Andreas Nicolaides asked where we can buy the book.
It's through it's online. Cambridge University Press has an online store, and then it would be Amazon. And in Cyprus, I believe it would be the Mouflon bookshop in Nicosia. Yeah.
And we can find it in every good library.
Thank you, Geoffrey. You are very kind.
So do support independent bookshops, not Amazon.
That's right. That's yeah.
Okay. So I think if there is no other question, I would like to thank you, Anthi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you, Justine. Thank you, Tassos, for your wonderful introductions, for the questions, for everything, and for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to have such an exciting discussion about your book. And so congratulations again, and thank you very much. Thank you, Tasso. Thank you, Justine. And I would like just to inform you so that this webinar, like all the others webinar organized by the research program Écrire l'histoire de la Grèce franque, will be uploaded on the Frankica website. We talked about it previously. And so it's the portal created by the program's team. The next webinar will be dedicated to Florian Chamorel's volume published last year. It's in French, Un destin méditerranéen, les princes de la maison de Savoie en Méditerranée orientale, 14e, 15e siècle. And this webinar will be organized by my colleague Philippe Trella, and will take place the 17th of December. And the registration link will be shared in the next days by the French School of Athens. So thank you so much, and good evening, everyone.